Dismissing a legend is a dangerous game. When a heavy-hitting Hollywood stunt coordinator scoffed at a wiry, unknown martial artist barely breaking 140 pounds, she expected a joke. What she got was a terrifying grip that shattered her ego and birthed an unforgettable myth. Los Angeles in the autumn of 1965 was a city governed by the illusion of size. In the backlot gyms and dusty training warehouses of Hollywood, the currency of respect was measured in raw mass, thick necks, and the ability to throw a fake punch that looked like it could shatter a brick wall. The cinematic brawls of the era were dominated by hulking cowboys and towering bruisers. Precision and speed were foreign concepts. It was the era of the cinematic slugfest. At the absolute top of this physical hierarchy was Brenda Palmer. Standing 6 feet 1 inch tall and weighing a solidly muscled 210 pounds, Brenda was an anomaly in the industry. A former regional judo champion who had seamlessly transitioned into Hollywood stunt work, she was the secret weapon for directors who needed someone to convincingly toss grown men through prop saloon doors. She was tough, she was cynical, and she possessed a crushing grip that had humbled more than a few overly confident leading men. To Brenda, physics was simple. The bigger mass always moved the smaller mass. Anything else was just cheap parlor tricks. On a muggy Tuesday afternoon, a private warehouse in Culver City had been rented out by television producer William Dozier. Dozier was riding high, looking to cast a new television pilot, centered around a masked vigilante, and he was hunting for a different kind of action. The air inside the warehouse was thick with the smell of canvas, stale sweat, and the pungent aroma of Dozier's imported cigars. Brenda was holding court near a row of heavy bags, surrounded by her usual crew of stuntmen, massive, broad-shouldered veterans like Arthur Sterling and Thomas Mitchell. They were stretching, lifting heavy dumbbells and waiting for the highly anticipated combat visionary Dozier had been raving about all morning. Dozier had promised them a martial arts genius, someone who was going to completely rewrite the way television violence was choreographed. The heavy steel door of the warehouse screeched open. The low murmur of the stuntmen died down as they turned to look at the entrance. Walking alongside the famous American Kenpo pioneer Ed Parker was a young Chinese-American man dressed in a sharp, tailored gray suit. He wore thick-rimmed glasses, carried a modest leather portfolio, and walked with a quiet, almost feline grace. He was 5'7" and weighed roughly 135 pounds. Brenda Palmer stared. She blinked once, twice, and then a slow, booming laugh erupted from her chest. The sound bounced off the corrugated tin roof of the warehouse. "William," Brenda called out, her voice dripping with unapologetic sarcasm. "You told us you were bringing in a fighting machine. Did the delivery boy get lost on his way to the accounting department?" "Pa!" A chorus of chuckles rippled through the stunt crew. Arthur Sterling leaned against a heavy bag, shaking his head. "Come on, boss. You want us to take stage combat falls for a guy who looks like a strong breeze could knock him into next week." William Dozier sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew the stuntmen were fiercely territorial, but he had seen what the young man in the suit could do at the Long Beach International Karate Championships just a year prior. "Brenda, Arthur, tone it down," Dozier warned, his voice sharp. "This is Bruce Lee, and I highly suggest you show him some respect. He's going to be coordinating the close-quarter sequences for the new pilot." Brenda crossed her thick arms over her chest, stepping forward to close the distance between herself and the newcomer. She looked down at Bruce, her eyes scanning his slender frame, noting the lack of bulging biceps or a thick, brawler's neck. To her trained eye, he possessed none of the necessary anatomical tools to generate real stopping power. "Respect is earned on the mats, William," Brenda said, her tone suddenly turning cold and deadly serious. She shifted her gaze directly to Bruce. "No offense, kid, But in this town, if you want grown men to listen to you about how to throw a punch, you need to look like you can actually take one. You weigh what, $130? I bench pressed twice your body weight for a warm-up. Bruce Lee did not flinch. He did not puff out his chest, nor did he raise his voice to defend his honor. He simply stood there, perfectly balanced, his face completely impassive behind his thick lenses. Physical size, Bruce said, his voice smooth, heavily accented and startlingly calm, is a crude measurement of kinetic potential. A boulder is heavy, but it cannot move itself. A bullet is light, but it can tear through steel. Brenda snorted, clearly unimpressed by the philosophical retort. Cute poetry, Bruce, but we deal in physics here. Mass times acceleration. Exactly. Bruce smiled softly, a subtle, almost dangerous gleam appearing in his dark eyes. But I think your understanding of acceleration might be fundamentally flawed. The atmosphere in the warehouse shifted. The stuntmen stopped shuffling. Ed Parker, standing slightly behind Bruce, took a preemptive half-step back, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. Parker had felt Bruce's power firsthand. He knew exactly what was about to happen. Brenda's jaw tightened. She hated being challenged, especially in front of her crew, and especially by someone she deemed physically inferior. She decided right then and there to end this charade, to put this arrogant philosophical lightweight exactly where she felt he belonged. "All right, Mr. Bullet," Brenda sneered, stepping right into Bruce's personal space, towering over him. She extended her large, calloused right hand, offering it in what appeared to be a standard, polite greeting. "Let's formally introduce ourselves, then." It was a classic Hollywood strong-arm tactic, a handshake meant to crush the bones of the recipient, to assert dominance without throwing a single punch. It was a test of sheer, raw, unadulterated grip strength. Bruce looked at her outstretched hand. He knew exactly what she was doing. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out his own hand to meet hers. The moment their hands connected, Brenda Palmer initiated her trap. She planted her feet wide, engaged her massive shoulder muscles, and clamped down with all the crushing force her 200-pound frame could generate. It was a grip that had made seasoned, muscle-bound actors wince and beg for mercy on movie sets. She expected Bruce to gasp, to contort in pain, and to immediately try to pull away, permanently establishing the pecking order of the gym. Instead, she felt nothing but a terrifying, unyielding resistance. As Brenda squeezed harder, her knuckles turning white, she felt as though she had clamped her hand around a solid cylinder of industrial steel. Bruce's hand did not compress. The bones in his hand did not shift. He stood perfectly still, his breathing completely relaxed, staring back into Brenda's increasingly confused eyes. What Brenda didn't know, what nobody in that Culver City warehouse besides Ed Parker knew, was that Bruce Lee possessed an almost pathological obsession with forearm and grip strength. Long before his cinematic fame, Bruce had custom-built grip machines, trained his hands with thick canvas bags filled with iron bearings, and performed two-finger push-ups to forge tendons that were practically bulletproof. His forearms, hidden beneath the sleeves of his tailored suit, were dense networks of fast-twitch muscle fibers wound tighter than suspension cables. "Is that everything?" Bruce asked quietly, the volume of his voice so low that Brenda almost didn't hear it over the sound of her own straining breath. Brenda's confident smirk vanished. A cold prickle of adrenaline washed down her spine. She gritted her teeth, throwing her entire upper body weight into her hand, trying desperately to crush his fingers. Sweat broke out on her forehead. "My turn," Bruce whispered. Bruce Lee closed his fingers. He didn't just squeeze. He engaged a kinetic chain that started from his anchored feet, traveled up his hips, channeled through his latissimus dorsi, and exploded into his hand. Brenda's eyes widened in sheer horror. A sharp, involuntary gasp escaped her lips as agonizing pain shot up her arm. It felt as though her hand was caught in a hydraulic vise that was slowly, methodically closing. The small bones in her hand ground against one another with a sickening, audible creak. Her massive biceps flexed violently as her body's natural reflexes kicked in, desperately trying to pull away from the excruciating pressure. But she couldn't move. Bruce's grip was absolute. He had essentially locked her arm into a rigid frame, controlling her entirely through the connection of their hands. Humiliated, panicking, and blinded by the sudden intense pain, Brenda's martial arts instincts bypassed her rational thought. She was a judo champion. When trapped, she threw. With a guttural yell, Brenda lunged forward, pivoting on her lead foot. She attempted to use Bruce's own grip against him, throwing her heavy hips in to execute a massive Asoto Gurria major outer reaping throw meant to slam him flat on his back onto the concrete floor. It was an explosive, violent move, utilizing all 210 pounds of her body weight. Against any normal man of Bruce's size, the sheer momentum would have sent him flying. But Bruce Lee was not a normal man. As Brenda's heavy hips slammed into his side to initiate the throw, Bruce didn't resist her force. He merged with it. In a fraction of a second, he dropped his center of gravity by a mere 2 inches, perfectly aligning his skeletal structure to the floor. He became an immovable object. Brenda hit him, and it was like a speeding truck colliding with a deeply rooted oak tree. The shock wave of her own momentum bounced back into her body. Because Bruce had neutralized her kinetic energy flawlessly, Brenda's feet suddenly flew out from under her. She lost all balance, her massive frame tilting backward into empty air. She was going down hard, the back of her skull hurtling toward the unforgiving concrete. Arthur Sterling and the other stuntmen shouted in alarm, lunging forward, but they were too far away. William Dozier dropped his cigar. Just inches before Brenda's head smashed into the floor, her downward plunge violently stopped. The warehouse was dead silent, save for the heavy, panicked panting of the giant stunt woman. Brenda opened her eyes. She was suspended in midair, hovering mere inches above the concrete floor. She looked up, her vision trembling. Bruce Lee was standing exactly where he had been, his posture completely unbroken. His right arm was extended downward, his hand still locked in that terrifying vise-like grip around her hand. With just one arm, from an awkward, downward angle, this 135-pound man had completely arrested the freefall of a 200-pound woman, holding her suspended in the air through sheer, unfathomable tendon strength and flawless mechanical leverage. Bruce looked down at her, his face devoid of anger, arrogance, or mockery. It was the face of a master observing a simple physics experiment. Mass times acceleration, Bruce said softly, echoing her earlier words. But if you do not control your center of gravity, your mass is just a weapon you are using against yourself. Slowly, effortlessly, Bruce pulled his arm upward, hauling Brenda's dead weight back to a standing position as if he were picking up a dropped jacket. He released her hand. Brenda stumbled backward, her chest heaving, cradling her throbbing right hand against her stomach. Her face was pale, drained of all the arrogant color it had held just 2 minutes prior. She looked at Bruce, then down at her own trembling hand, and then back at the small, suited man in front of her. The illusion of size had been shattered in an instant. Arthur Sterling and the rest of the crew were frozen in shock, their mouths hanging slightly open. Nobody dared speak. The undisputed heavyweight queen of their world had just been effortlessly dismantled, physically and psychologically, without a single punch being thrown. Bruce smoothed the lapels of his suit jacket and turned back to William Dozier, who was staring at him with wide, ecstatic eyes. "Now," Bruce said, his tone polite and businesslike, as if the last 60 seconds had merely been a slight detour. "Shall we discuss the choreography, William?" Silence hung heavy in the Culver City warehouse, thick and suffocating. The air, previously charged with the aggressive testosterone of veteran stuntmen, had been entirely deflated by a 135-pound man in a tailored suit. Brenda Palmer, still cradling her right hand, retreated to the sidelines. She sank onto a wooden bench, staring blankly at the concrete floor where she had nearly cracked her skull. The throbbing in her hand was a harsh, pulsing reminder of her shattered worldview. Arthur Sterling, a mountain of a man with a jawline like a cinder block, watched Brenda carefully. He had worked with her for 5 years. He had seen her toss grown men through breakaway glass without breaking a sweat. Seeing her dismantled so effortlessly triggered a deep, unfamiliar anxiety within him. Arthur was a product of the Hollywood brawler era. His entire livelihood depended on throwing wide, looping haymakers and taking dramatic, theatrical falls. If what this Chinese-American kid was demonstrating became a new standard, Arthur and his kind were suddenly obsolete. William Dozier, oblivious to the existential dread gripping his stunt crew, clapped his hands together. "Brilliant, Bruce. Absolutely brilliant. That is exactly the kind of dynamic, unexpected kinetic energy I want for the Green Hornet." Bruce gave a polite nod, removing his suit jacket and draping it carefully over a folding chair. He rolled up his pristine white sleeves, revealing the dense, corded muscle of his forearms, the very muscles that had just humbled their champion. "Thank you, William, but if we are to film this properly, your men must unlearn everything they know about stage combat. We are no longer choreographing a drunken bar fight. We are choreographing a surgical strike." He stepped toward the center of the mat, gesturing for the stuntmen to gather around. Reluctantly, the crew shuffled forward. They moved cautiously, eyeing Bruce as if he were an unexploded piece of ordnance. "The Western approach to fighting is predicated on telegraphing," Bruce began, pacing slowly. "You pull your arm back to throw a punch, signaling your intention to your opponent and the camera. It looks powerful, but it is slow, inefficient, and fundamentally false. In real combat, if you pull your hand back, you are already dead." Arthur Sterling crossed his massive arms, his skepticism boiling over into defensive anger. "Listen, Bruce," Arthur rumbled, his voice a deep baritone. "That leverage trick you pulled on Brenda was neat. But this is television. If we don't wind up, the audience won't register the impact. We aren't doing real combat. We're doing entertainment. A straight, fast punch doesn't read on camera." Bruce stopped pacing. He turned to Arthur, his expression serene. "A fast punch does not read on camera because your cameras are too slow, Arthur. Not because the technique is flawed. But I understand your doubt. You need to feel the difference between a theatrical performance and genuine explosive timing." Bruce held up a single black boxing focus mitt, slipping it onto his right hand. He patted his chest with his left hand. "Hit me." Arthur blinked, looking around at the other men. "You're kidding. I have 70 pounds on you. If I hit you, William will have to recast his action coordinator." "Do not worry about my health," Bruce smiled slightly. "Worry about your timing. Throw your best punch, the one you use to end fights on screen. Do not hold back." Arthur rolled his shoulders, a confident smirk returning to his face. This was his domain. He squared up, planting his heavy boots on the mat. He locked his eyes onto Bruce's chest, pulling his massive right fist back, loading his shoulder with all his kinetic energy, preparing to launch a devastating, cinematic overhand right. But the moment Arthur's shoulder twitched backward to initiate the strike, Bruce moved. It was not a block. It was not an evasion. It was an interception. Before Arthur could even propel his fist forward, Bruce had closed the gap with a terrifying, sliding burst of speed. Bruce's left hand shot out like a striking cobra, slapping the inside of Arthur's bicep, completely jamming the trajectory of the massive punch before it even gained momentum. In the exact same fraction of a second, Bruce's right hand, still wearing the focus mitt, stopped precisely 1 inch from Arthur's nose. The wind from Bruce's strike ruffled Arthur's hair. The sound of Bruce's left hand slapping Arthur's bicep echoed like a gunshot. Arthur froze, his fist still cocked helplessly behind his ear, his eyes crossed as he stared at the leather mitt hovering a millimeter from his face. He had not even seen Bruce move. One moment the man was standing 3 feet away. The next, he had completely short-circuited Arthur's attack and held lethal position. "Jeet Kune Do," Bruce said softly, lowering his hands. "The way of the intercepting fist. You do not wait to block. You attack their attack. Your massive size, Arthur, is useless if your nervous system transmits the signal too slowly. You gave me an entire second of warning by pulling your shoulder back." Brenda, watching from the bench, finally understood. She stood up, her right hand heavily taped, but her eyes clear. The humiliation was gone, replaced by a ravenous curiosity. "He's right, Artie," Brenda said, her voice cutting through the silent warehouse. She walked over to the man, looking directly at Bruce with newfound respect. "We've been acting like bruisers, relying on gravity and mass. This is geometry. It's physics without the waste." Bruce looked at Brenda, a genuine smile warming his features. "Exactly, Brenda. And once you understand the geometry, your size becomes a true asset, not a liability." The tension in the room snapped, replaced by a sudden electric focus. The stunt crew, led by a newly converted Brenda Palmer, spent the next 4 hours undergoing a brutal, mind-bending recalibration. Bruce stripped away their wide stances, forcing them to balance on the balls of their feet. He forbade them from pulling their punches, teaching them the mechanics of the 1-inch punch, generating catastrophic power through hip rotation and wrist snap rather than shoulder travel. It was a grueling, agonizing afternoon. Egos were bruised, muscles cramped from moving in unfamiliar ways, but a profound transformation was occurring. Brenda, with her deep understanding of judo leverage, adapted the fastest. She began helping Bruce translate his concepts into language the Western stuntmen could digest. She became his enforcer, correcting Arthur's footing when he slipped back into his old habits. A bizarre, unprecedented alliance had formed. The heavyweight queen and the lightweight philosopher were fundamentally rewriting the DNA of Hollywood action. 3 weeks later, the soundstage at 20th Century Fox was a chaotic symphony of glaring lights, shouting technicians, and the frantic energy of a television pilot in full swing. The Green Hornet was heavily relying on its masked sidekick, Kato, to deliver the visual flair the producers desperately needed. Norman Foster, a seasoned television director known for his efficiency and short temper, was staring at the playback monitor, rubbing his eyes in sheer frustration. "Cut! Cut the cameras!" Norman bellowed, waving his script angrily at the set. "This is useless. It's completely useless." Bruce Lee, dressed in the iconic black Kato chauffeur uniform and domino mask, stood amidst 3 groaning stuntmen. Arthur Sterling was currently picking himself up off the breakaway table they had just crashed through. William Dozier hurried over to the director's chair. "What's the problem, Norman? The choreography looked incredible from where I'm standing." "It looks incredible to the naked eye, William," Norman shouted, pointing violently at the monitor. "But my cameras operate at 24 frames per second. I just watched the playback. Lee is moving so fast that he's literally disappearing between the frames. It looks like a glitch. It looks like we skipped film. The audience isn't going to buy that this kid is dropping 3 massive guys if they can't even see the punches land." A heavy silence fell over the set. The network executives sitting in the shadows behind the director began murmuring nervously. This was the exact fear Arthur had voiced weeks ago. Realism was too fast for television. Bruce walked off the set, pulling off his mask, his face tight with frustration. He had compromised enough. He had slowed his movements down considerably, but anything slower felt entirely unnatural to his highly tuned nervous system. Brenda Palmer, acting as the assistant stunt coordinator, stepped in front of the furious director. She was no longer the arrogant bruiser from Culver City. She was a convert, a fierce protector of Bruce's methodology. "Mr. Foster," Brenda said firmly, her large frame blocking his view of the monitor. "You cannot ask him to move slower. If he artificially slows his kinetic chain, the leverage breaks down, the strikes look fake, and my boys risk actual injury because the timing is compromised. The problem isn't the martial artist. The problem is the machinery." Norman scoffed. "I can't change the frame rate of standard television cameras, Brenda. If we can't see the hit, the scene fails." A tense standoff ensued. The entire production was hinging on this close-quarters combat sequence. If Bruce couldn't adapt, the dynamic action Dozier promised would be scrapped for traditional, sluggish brawling. Bruce, listening from the sidelines, suddenly stepped forward. He looked at the heavy Panavision camera, then at Brenda, and finally at Arthur. A subtle shift occurred in his eyes, the same calculating gleam he had shown before grabbing Brenda's hand weeks prior. "I have a solution," Bruce announced calmly. "I will not slow my strikes, but I will extend the follow-through." Norman frowned. "What does that mean?" "In real combat, once a strike connects and energy is transferred, you immediately retract the limb to protect yourself," Bruce explained, demonstrating a rapid-fire back fist that was nothing more than a blur. "It is the retraction that the camera is missing. If I leave my arm extended for a fraction of a second longer after the point of impact, sacrificing my defensive guard for the sake of the lens, the camera will capture the end of the motion. It will create the illusion of a visible strike without compromising the speed of the initiation." It was a brilliant, highly technical compromise. It required Bruce to fight entirely against his own deeply ingrained reflexes, intentionally creating a vulnerability in his form purely for the sake of cinematography. "Let's try it," Dozier agreed instantly. The actors reset. Action was called. Arthur Sterling lunged forward with a modified, tighter hook. Bruce intercepted it with blinding speed, executing a vicious backfist to Arthur's chest. But this time, instead of snapping his arm back to a scent line, Bruce held the strike out, his fist planted firmly against Arthur's chest pad for a microsecond before Arthur dramatically threw himself backward, propelled by the actual concussive force Bruce generated from his hips. "Cut!" Norman yelled. He practically dove toward the playback monitor. The crew held their collective breath. On the small screen, the scene played out. It was revolutionary. The audience saw the blinding, almost supernatural blur of Bruce's initiation, followed immediately by the solid, unmistakable visual of the fist connecting with Arthur's chest, anchoring the action in reality. It possessed a raw, terrifying speed never before seen on Western television, yet it was completely legible to the viewer. "My God," Norman whispered, his anger entirely vanishing. "It's beautiful. It looks like lightning." The network executives in the back broke into spontaneous applause. Brenda caught Bruce's eye across the set. She gave him a slow, deep nod of absolute respect. He had not only proven his physical superiority, but he had also proven his intellectual dominance over the medium itself. He had bent the limitations of Hollywood machinery to fit his philosophy. Months later, when The Green Hornet premiered, Kato became an instant sensation. The Western world was introduced to a new paradigm of action sleek, lightning-fast, and devastatingly efficient. The era of the hulking bruiser was permanently over. But behind the scenes, the true legacy was forged not on celluloid, but in the sweat-stained warehouses where a massive stuntwoman learned that true power wasn't measured in pounds or inches. It was measured in the perfect, terrifying alignment of physics, intent, and a grip that refused to let go until the world completely changed its mind. Legends aren't born from agreements. They are forged in the fires of conflict and skepticism. Bruce Lee didn't just break wooden board. He shattered the rigid, outdated paradigms of an entire industry through undeniable physics and flawless execution. If this true story of Hollywood history blew your mind, hit that like button, share this video with a fellow martial arts fan, and subscribe for more untold stories of real-life legends.